Hello and welcome to the Apple, iPhone, iOS Voiceover Compatible Games interview series. I'm your host, Aaron Spelker. Apple, iPhone, iOS Voiceover Compatible Games is a group that's focused on all things mobile gaming and accessibility. And through our interview series, we like to interview game developers as well as accessibility gaming influencers. And today we have one of those influencers known by just one name. His name is Whistler. Whistler, welcome to the interview series.
Thank you. I wouldn't necessarily call me an influencer. I just enjoy and advocate for accessible games.
Well, that's what those people who are doing that, I consider them influencing, how people are viewing accessibility as well as, finding new games that are out there. So, Whistler, I know you have your Theory of a Blind Man YouTube page, which, covers a wide variety of things from a blind perspective. And one of those things is gaming, which is what we're going to be most interested in for this interview series. But, tell people what they can find out when they're, looking at your content. What are they going to find, not only on gaming, but just, beyond that as well?
Yeah, it's been a while since I've posted something. I'm going through dialysis currently, so it's really hard to find the energy and motivation to do stuff. But yeah, primarily if I find a game or someone refers a game to me, then I'll put it up there as like a test run to see how accessible it is. It's been a lot of I think primarily I've got iOS accessible games on there. There are some PC games that I'm looking into as well as PlayStation. I don't have an Xbox, so I can't do the Xbox side of things, but I would like to in the future. That would be fun.
What made you start the Theory of a Blind Man? Lots of people play games and do things, but they don't start YouTube pages about it. What made you start a YouTube page about gaming and accessibility and blind living?
Well, it didn't start off that way. Primarily, my content revolves around weird things you find on the internet. Gaming came later, and so yeah, it's just it evolves with my channel evolves with what I'm interested in the moment. So it could cover a variety of content. Of course, blindness is the focus really, and how we do things and how we can do things.
And how many people do you have kind of following your content right now?
I think like 2,300 on YouTube.
Excellent. And are they good at giving you feedback, and is a good kind of dialogue back and forth over your YouTube content?
Yeah, I get a lot of good feedback. A lot of people are appreciative of what I put out there and how I put it out there. I think the how you deliver your content is a big thing. Allowing people to understand the content without feeling stupid.
So with the gaming specific content, I mean, you mentioned you have a lot of iOS, some PC, some PlayStation, hopefully one day Xbox. Of the platforms you do kind of cover, which one do you think currently is the most accessible, and which one do you think has the greatest future for being accessible?
I'd have to say the games that are made accessible, I would say iOS is the most accessible right now currently. And what was the second part of the question?
Just which platform do you think has the greatest future for bringing accessibility to games?
That's a tough one, because it all really depends on the developer and where that developer puts their on which platforms. I mean, thanks to that game on PlayStation, Last of Us Part 2, I think that's really opened the door for accessibility. So I'm looking forward to the future of PlayStation, mostly because I've got a PlayStation.
Sure.
But there's a lot of games that are on the PC that are accessible, and I don't know why, but those game developers are putting them out on Steam,
Yeah.
and Steam is not accessible. So I don't understand why they do that.
Yeah, they have kind of a gate that prevents us to get to the accessible game.
Yeah.
Uh, your content, both, your YouTube, and I know you had a podcast at one point where you talked to various developers about accessibility and gaming
Hmm.
accessibility. Tell me about some of those interviews, those connections that you made with game developers about accessibility, and any interesting tidbits you learned or got out of those interviews.
Um, yeah, I mean, I've made some really good connections. What really thrusted me into A11Y was Joe Quirk from Mental Vision. He introduced me to a bunch of people, and we're still friends to this day. So that was a really good connection that I had. As far as tidbits go, illegally cited, aka Jesse
So,
Anderson.
yeah.
He's been on top in the forefront of accessible gaming, especially VR. And Apple just announced ROS, which is their platform for AR, VR, which is coming soon. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how they incorporate accessibility into their VR.
Right. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of the similar people. I've gotten to know Joe. I just actually have an interview that's going to be posting on Wednesday with him about his chapter 3 for Circus Master's Revenge. I've gotten to know Jesse Anderson and Michael Gray, another one. These are people that you get to know, and they're always interested in connecting you with other people, and
Yeah,
they're just great people to get to know and expand the knowledge of this space, particularly the gaming space, with those individuals.
absolutely.
So with you kind of mentioned this before, that it kind of really depends on developers on making accessible games. And as you probably know, as we all know as blind gamers, that there are very few games that actually are accessible. Of all the numerous games that are out there across a wide variety of genres, only
Mhm.
a sliver of those are accessible to the point where we can actually play them. And what would you think is, from your opinion, what are the roadblocks that are really preventing these developers from creating accessible games, particularly considering that there's been so much attention, particularly the last few years, around game accessibility?
Um, oof. I'd have to say just a lack of knowledge and education. Um, it's easy to say that, well, if this game can do it, why can't other games? Why aren't they? And I think it's just a lack of education in us as gamers, the consumers, reaching out to game developers, um, asking or saying that, hey, your next game, could you consider accessibility? And that'll really start the conversation if they're interested. Like, oh, what's accessibility? And so that opens up the line of communication to really get things more accessible for us.
So, I mean, what do you think we can do? I mean, so one-off emails or one-off contacts, at least that, is something and gets it started. But is there anything we can do en masse as a community, almost like, get a petition going or whatever it might be, or, how can we get a bigger splash of attention to these developers that, hey, we're a community, we're interested in gaming. There's millions and millions of us around the world. I think it's like 270 million people suffer from significant visual impairment. So
Mhm.
it's not a small group um, that you could make games accessible and not only bring joy to a bunch of gamers who normally are left out of the conversation, but also help your sales. That's a niche that you can tap into that can buy your games that you aren't buying your games now because they're not accessible. What can we do that might have a bigger impact or a bigger splash? Any ideas that you have there?
I would say, yeah, in numbers we can achieve more. Um, but I think that's more of an awareness standpoint. I think each of us individually need to contact developers, because then they're like, oh, okay, I got this email. Oh, I got this one. Oh, I got this one. Instead of like a mass email or something, I think the individual will have more power, but also in numbers. So it's not just one or two people sending the emails out. It still has to be all of us together to send those emails and make sure we get some kind of contact as far as making the awareness for accessibility.
So, um, you've played a lot of games, PC, iOS, as you were mentioning, PlayStation. What's been kind of your favorite gaming accessibility experience? What game has really you found a lot of joy in from an accessibility standpoint?
I really enjoy a PC game called Swamp,
Mhm.
and it's a first person shooter. I'm a first person shooter type of gamer anyway. I love first person shooters. Ever since Wolfenstein 3D, I've been hooked, and that's when I had sight. So that's a little different. Joe Quirk's game Circus Master really gave me hope for the future of blind gaming. I love the interaction of that type of game as well. So that's kind of what I look forward to.
Have you delved into the new game that just came out, To the Dragon Cave, which is kind of a first-person shooter game?
No, not yet, but I look forward to it.
Little different from Joe's, because as you know, with Joe's, you're kind of using the gyroscope, you're spinning, around to find the clown, the killer clowns who are attacking you.
Mm-hmm.
In To the Dragon Cave, you kind of swipe left and right to kind of spin around, so you don't have to actually move your body to do that one. But,
Okay.
so a little bit different. Same general concept, but from a mechanic of how do you move around and spin around.
Right, right.
It's not moving your whole body. Um, what about from the standpoint of, what game do you really wish, particularly, I mean, I have kind of the same thing. I used to be sighted, 3 years ago, I lost my sight, played many decades of gaming that was sighted. And so there's
Mm-hmm.
lots of games that I miss playing that I could play sighted that now I can't play as a blind person. I mean, do you have games, whether it was when you were sighted or just, now that you're like, oh, I just wish I could play that game, but it's just not accessible. What game is out there that is kind of, your white whale, if you will, that you wish you could be playing, but it's just not accessible.
Grand Theft Auto.
Did you get to play that as a sighted person?
Oh yeah. That was my favorite game. And I know now that oh, what's his name? Someone had made a patch for part of Grand Theft Auto and has made it accessible. You just can't do the missions, which that's the whole point of the game.
Right.
Um, yeah, Grand Theft Auto for sure.
How far, like which Grand Theft Auto did you get to play up to?
I got to play. I forget the order of them, but Vice City,
Yeah.
San Andreas,
4, which is in New York,
yeah,
and then the 5, which is California, or the
right,
equivalent of California. And I got
yeah,
up to 5, so I think that's the most recent one that's been out.
yep.
Yeah, those are fun games just to tool around, and also great.
Hmm.
Several of them have great stories, some better than others. But I mean, Vice City, I just love that game. It's
Yeah,
just so much fun.
I think that's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's the most just inherently enjoyable. I mean, obviously graphics have advanced and things like that, but just
Yeah.
from a storyline, that's a great one. We were just talking about, your vision. You were one-sighted. I mean, right now, what's your current state of vision? Are you fully blind? Are you visually impaired? What can you see or not see at this point?
Yeah, I'm totally blind.
Totally blind. And what has been for you, for gaming purposes, what's been the biggest challenge to playing games as a fully blind person?
I think it's going from having sight and knowing what games looked like compared to how they act today. It's like my brain wants to take over what it has seen. And so when I hear something familiar, then my brain will take what it has seen before and apply it. And it makes it really frustrating to game that way.
I have kind of I think a similar thing to what you're expressing. So I played the original Last of Us as a sighted person, loved that game.
Mm-hmm.
And when Last of Us Part 2 came out, which was after I was blind, I said, okay, well, maybe this can be playable. And I'm sure it's a fully, playable and fun game for a blind person. But when you've played that game as a sighted person, for me, it was just, this is less than. I'm having a less than experience. And it really, that came out on the heels of me going blind. And it really depressed me for a while. I put down my PlayStation remote, and I haven't really picked it up since. And for about a year, maybe more, I didn't play any games because I was like, oh, they're just not accessible for me. This is just something that's now going to be not available to me in my life. And after probably a year and a half, I said, I just can't. I enjoy games too much. This is too much of a hole in my life. I have to find some way to do this. And I made a switch. I kind of left the consoles for now. I mean, hopefully we'll be able to get back to them and play, all games fully. But, I switched over to iOS and, said, all right, if I can access my phone with VoiceOver, maybe I can play some of these games with VoiceOver. And that's where I kind of started focusing my attention. And again, kind of as I looked out there and was looking for what are all the list of all the accessible games that you can play on your iPhone as a blind person, I wasn't really finding that list, and decided, well, at some point, if this list doesn't exist, maybe I should create this list. So that's where I started, my Facebook group, where I'm finding, reviewing, playing, giving people tips about accessible iPhone games across, a wide variety of genres. To just kind of make sure that other people don't fall into that funk that I did, to just say, nothing's available to us. I mean, there are some good games. I keep my fingers crossed that we'll get more and more in depth and interesting games to play. Some of that, you're starting to see some of that at games like Sporty Quest, which is a more complex RPG than we've probably ever seen before. And, some of the other empire building type of games like Celtic Tribes and things like that. But, the more, or BC 4000 or 4000 BC, whatever way it goes, I keep my fingers crossed that we'll get more and more available to us, and one day hopefully get back to console games where I don't feel like this is a less than experience. That's my personal hope.
Have you checked out AppleViz?
Yeah, that's for me. That's actually one of my questions for you, but that's where I've found a lot of games as these are potentially accessible, and I'll start to play those. And I wish they would cull their list a little bit, because some of the things that are out on AppleViz is like, you go into it and it's actually, this game is not accessible. So I'm kind of like, why is this on the list at all? Don't show me games, don't show me games that are not accessible. That's silly. I know most games are not accessible. Just give me a list that is accessible.
Yeah.
And then there's other things that, it's told me, oh, this is accessible. And I don't know if an iOS update or something has now made the game inaccessible, but it's not a, 100% what's on there is, that says it's accessible is really accessible in a way that you can play it. And again, I don't know if it was accessible at one time, but now with, 15.4 or whatever, it's not accessible. I don't know, how those updates work and change things. But I know that they do. So, but I just keep, pecking away, and, I think I'm up to, over 80 games that I've found over, a wide variety of genres that I've, put out there, reviewed, to try to make a list for people that these are playable and here's what they're all about. And I wish AppleViz too on their list, it kind of gives you like a brief summary, but and I guess you could read through the comments for reviews, but I wish they had a real review for each game, like an in-depth review. I think that would make that AppleViz list more meaningful. But
and I wish too that's one of the frustrations that I have with AppleViz. Is like, like you said, why bother include the ones that are not accessible? Just get rid of those.
Right.
And then secondly is that when you select that game category and you're going through the list, I wish right there on that main page of results that it would say that it is accessible or not accessible. If you're
You
going
don't
to
have
do
to click into each one. Yeah.
yeah, because then you have to click on each one and go down. It's just pain in the butt.
Well, I've tried to train myself that everything as a blind person is slower.
Yeah.
That thing that should take 1 second takes us 30 seconds, and
Yeah.
so it's one of my things that I really have to get zen about, because I'm used to a very fast pace. As a sight person, I was go 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 go, a gazillion things going on at once, and as a blind person, I just got to slow it all down, and I got to realize that getting over to whatever Target to buy something is now a production of transportation and pickups and waiting and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So, you just gotta get zen about it. That's what I'm trying to
Yeah,
do.
you have to.
Practice my patience. What else? You have AppleVis, as you mentioned. So one of my questions for you was, how do you find your games that you play? Where do you go? What are your resources? Who do you follow on YouTube, or what sites do you go to find games to play that you enjoy?
Honestly, I usually use Illegally Cited as a reference point, and he usually fills me in on games. So it's usually word of mouth. A lot of Twitter. Silence Combat, he's another one that I follow. Yeah, there's so many of them. It's like I said, I like first person shooters, and it doesn't seem like a lot of blind people play first person shooters. A lot of it are some what I call elementary games, and I lose interest in those type of games. So
That has
I'm
been
more
that's been a difficult genre. I mean, there's not too many entries in that genre for blind people. I mean, you got Circus
yeah.
Master's Revenge, you got To the Dragon Cave, you have uh, there's another one that's a zombie one that's kind of a first-person shooter type. Um, so there's not really too many options. I mean, I'm hoping with Circus Master's
Mhm.
Revenge and To the Dragon Cave that people start seeing, there's ways that you can do a first-person shooter for a blind person. And maybe
Yeah.
we'll get some more of those, because I know lots of people are, it's a common one that people ask about, what first-person shooter. And then, if you really want to dedicate the time, put your 10,000 hours in. I mean, you could be, I interviewed a guy named TJ the Blind Gamer who has like 13,000 kills as a fully blind person on Call of Duty, but he has like memorized the sound of every gun, and he can hear the echo off of when he fires a weapon, or when he's walking, he can tell from the echo off of the walls or off of where he is on the map. I mean, he's really dedicated a lot of time, which a lot of people may not have that time or patience to do that. But yeah, I'm hoping.
Yeah, that's another thing too that needs to be focused on is being able to just get into a game and just play it. I mean, to have to spend 10,000 hours to memorize a game, all the aspects of it is just not everybody can do that.
Exactly. Yeah, I find, when you get a good, flawless, accessible game, I can lose myself in that game and playing that game like I lost myself when I played a game sighted. The whole rest of the world, I'm distracted from the rest of the world, including my, blind disability, that I'm facing. And I get to just enjoy the game and kind of forget the rest of the world. But when you get a game that is, has issues with the accessibility, or you suddenly are playing it and you're into it, and then something happens, some button is not labeled, or some button is not pressable for whatever reason, and it suddenly halts you from that distraction. I mean, it's very jarring in a way that I think some sighted players don't necessarily face in the way that we do with those things. So that's why when I review a game, I try to point out like, hey, this is an issue, but this is how you easily get around it, just to make it smooth for the person who's playing that game behind me, so they don't get frustrated and kind of quit on a game that's otherwise good. But you might hit that issue, and trying to figure it out yourself, you might get frustrated. So since I've already figured it out, I try to tell people. So, I know you have your Theory of a Blind Man YouTube page. Where else can people find you if they're looking for content from Whistler? Where do they go besides the Theory of a Blind Man YouTube page?
My website, theoryofablindman.com. I've got everything there, all my resources that I've put together over the years, and I'm always looking to add to it. So if anybody has any recommendations, they can just shoot me an email and say, hey, include this link in your resources, and I'll most likely do it. All my social media is on the website as well, so it's really easy to find.
You're on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all of those things. So, what I'd like to do when kind of closing out the interview, I'd like to just kind of turn it over to you for kind of a final statement about, your thoughts about accessible gaming, the future, and, how we as a blind community can, assist the gaming community to create more games for us and, pay attention to us as gamers. Just any final thoughts you have on kind of the state of accessibility in gaming.
I think it's moving forward, especially in the last couple of years. The progression is exponential. I think as long as we keep doing what we're doing as far as spreading awareness goes, I think that'll really help as far as developers noticing us. And I think that's been the biggest thing, is there's this misnomer that there's not enough blind people playing games to make it worth their while, when in reality, I think it's more of a legal thing where it should be made accessible to begin with. So I think that's the hardest thing, is to get people to realize that it's not just a nicety or a convenience that they're making it accessible. For us, it's the law. So they got to pay attention a little more to their development and include accessibility in the beginning. And if they do that, then there really isn't the issues that they seem to have going back to make a game accessible. That's always harder, and a lot of things break when you do it that way. So I think
it's funny. It's funny. I mean, it's like a catch-22, right? You have developers saying, "Oh, I don't want to spend the money on doing this." There's not a lot of blind people who play games. Well, that's not really true. We don't play games because they're not accessible, right?
Exactly.
So you give us an accessible game, and when you have an accessible game, there's lots of blind people who will play it because there's not many accessible games available to us. So when there is, we'll play it.
Exactly.
So it's kind of a weird, statistic or whatever, that blind people don't play games. Well, of course we don't, because they're not accessible. So how can we play them? So, again, what I hope everybody in the community, take advice from Whistler, reach out to developers. Again, be nice, but mention accessibility to them, and how you would play their game if this accessibility feature was fixed. And Whistler, please, if you want to join the Facebook group and provide us any updates on any content that you're putting out. I always like to expose the community to other things that people are doing in kind of releasing content and updating people on what they're working on. So you're always more than welcome to come out to the group and post any updates that you have. And for those following this YouTube page,
I am a member, aren't I?
Well, there's 1,400 people in it, so I don't know. I don't remember everybody.
I think I am. I am.
Well, yeah. Well, then use it. Feel free to post out. And for those watching the YouTube video, I will put all the social media links that Whistler mentioned into the description, so you can go there and see all of his links and subscribe to his pages, and follow him on Twitter and Facebook. And again, if you want to see more interviews like this and get notified when they're coming out, subscribe to our YouTube page, and feel free to join us out on our Facebook group, which will also be provided in the YouTube description. So Whistler, thank you so much for taking the time, spending a little time telling us about yourself and about the content you're putting out, and your opinions and thoughts about accessibility. I really appreciate you spending the time with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, we look to hearing more from you soon.
Great. Thanks.